5 Live.
Across the UK.
This is BBC 5 Live. 5 Live Daily.
With me, Chris Warburton. It's not even the morning, is it? It's the afternoon. And as we speak, it's even more into the afternoon in France. And as we speak, 250 World War II veterans are in Normandy, driven to France in 90 black cabs to commemorate the 73rd anniversary of D-Day. It's a fantastic thing, part of the Back to the Beaches campaign, which is run by the Taxi Charity for Military Veterans. Frank Ashleigh is one of those veterans. He's 92 and was a glider pilot in World War II. And Emma spoke to him in November on this programme.
I volunteered on my 18th birthday, and after serving a year doing nothing, I volunteered for the glider pilot regiment. I became operational at the beginning of July 1944 and was posted to the RAF field at Harwell, where I was paired with Lofty Cummins, and we formed a crew. Together we did everything. We ate together, we slept together, we chased the birds together. Whatever we needed to do, we did it together. And I get very upset when I think of him.
Tell me what happened then to him.
I don't know. I was sent out on a patrol. I didn't get back. I was taken prisoner. And I learned later that he was killed in action, and I always visit his grave when I go to Arnhem every year.
We're going to hear more from Frank in just a moment. His chauffeur, if you like, a cab driver, Ian Parsons, also talked to us back then.
They are fabulous, actually. They're a sight to see. If you can imagine, a convoy of 80 taxis with World War II veterans on board, police outriders. We did a trip last year to the Netherlands, and just as Frank's been talking about going to Arnhem, we were there, and people, and I'm not exaggerating, for mile after mile, people would stand outside their houses, waving at us, and this was in the rain, and when we got to where we were going to meet at a certain museum, there would be a huge crowd waiting to meet the veterans and greet the veterans and thank the veterans, and it really was heartwarming stuff, and really I can't tell you how much I'm happy to be part of this.
Well, they're back together, Ian and Frank. They arrived in France on Sunday for the D-Day commemorations, and today is the final day of their trip.
I had a telephone call from Ian asking me if I would come on this trip to Normandy. I've always said no because I wasn't involved in that D-Day operation. I was in flying training at that time. But Ian impressed on me that they wanted as many glider pilots as they could get, and there aren't very many of us. So I agreed to come, and I'm not sorry.
How have you found it?
Absolutely breathtaking. There's no other word for it. Absolutely breathtaking.
In what way in particular for you?
The reception given to all of us by the people here is just out of this world. They just can't do enough for you.
And like you say, although you weren't actually involved in the D-Day landings, you were heavily involved in World War II. And I want to hear your story, and our listeners will want to hear your story in just a moment. But Ian, just tell us, how did you get involved with all of this?
Well, I've been a taxi driver for many years now, and I was involved with another charity trip where we take children to Disneyland in Paris, and one of the drivers there is the secretary of this charity, the Taxi Charity for Military Veterans, and he invited me to join the committee, which I was very happy to do. And since then, I've got increasingly involved with helping to organise trips such as this one, and very glad to be part of such a thing, I must admit.
Well, you've done well to persuade Frank to come, by the sounds of things.
It took a bit of doing, but he's smiling as it. Yes, but I know he's very pleased. But actually, exactly what Frank has been saying, the reaction from the people here in Normandy has been extraordinary. Yesterday we were driving, and we're in a large convoy of 90 taxis, and so we're having to drive very slowly into where it was the Merville Battery, where we were going to have lunch, and that were literally lined with people either side clapping and cheering and poking their heads through the windows, taking photographs. We've actually given all the veterans postcards of themselves to give out to the public, to autograph for them, and you could see the delight on their faces. And they were just saying thank you. You know, they're saying thank you for helping to liberate their country. That's what they're thanking veterans for.
Must be quite a sight. 250 veterans, 90 cabs, people waving and cheering. What does that gratitude feel like, that public display of gratitude, Frank?
I would say it brings a tear to your eye and a lump in your throat. And there's nothing else one can say. That's the reaction. You just don't know how to receive the gratitude that you're getting.
Yeah. And you... Go on, sorry, Ian.
Sorry, Chris. I was going to say my wife Anne is helping with everything here, and so she was sitting in the back with one of our veterans, and it literally brought tears to her eyes as they were applauding this gentleman. So it's not just the veterans that are affected. We all are by this extraordinary sort of warmth. Warmth coming from everyone.
Yeah. You were a glider pilot during the war, Frank.
I was indeed, yes.
Describe a World War II glider to our listeners, first of all, so we can picture what you were in there.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to use pounds, shillings and pence to describe it. It has a wingspan of 88 feet. It weighs in excess of 7 tons, and it can carry more than its own weight inside it. It can carry 28 fully armed men. They are not paratroops. It is impossible to jump from a glider for the very good reason that you cannot open open the door. It will not open in flight. So we didn't have parachutes. Once you went into free flight, which you would do when the navigator of your tug told you are now in gliding range, we would pull off from the tug and go into free flight, go to our aim, our objective, apply the flaps, come in and land safely. We did not intentionally crash land, and very, very few of us did do anything other than a perfectly safe landing. We would then take the tail off the glider, which enabled us to unload it very, very quickly, and that's why everybody got the impression that the glider had crashed. It had not. The tail was taken off after we'd landed.
Did it always, I mean, you're making it sound very simple and safe. Did it always feel entirely safe for you?
Yes, everywhere we went, we had massive fighter escort. Jerry wouldn't come anywhere near us.
So what was your mission, Frank?
I was on the Arnhem trip. I landed on the second day, the second lift, as we call it. And our objective was to capture the bridge over the Rhine, over the Neder Rhine, which led into the Ruhr. Had we captured the Ruhr, which was the intention, the war would have been over because we would deprived Germany of the means of making munitions.
Yes.
Unfortunately, it didn't work. We were told to hold the bridge for 2 days, maximum 3 days. We held it for 9. And then of the 10,095 men that were landed, 4,500 by para and 5,500 by glider, we were about 2,000 men were evacuated over the Rhine by the Canadian Royal Engineers who were waiting for us.
And where were you taken?
I was a prisoner of war. I was captured on the Friday. I'd landed on the Sunday. I'd been cut off behind enemy lines for 4 days with 3 colleagues, and we'd spent those 3 days doing what you can imagine we were doing. One of them was then wounded, surrendered, and in shock told the Germans that there are 3 more upstairs, and they gave us 5 minutes to come down with their hands up before they would start lobbing grenades. So we used those 5 minutes to disable our weapons, so they were useless, and we surrendered.
I'm sure you've told this story many times before, Frank, as you must and as you should, and people need to hear it as well, obviously. But can you still picture that day clearly in your mind as well?
I can remember every moment of it. But the one thing that stands out more than anything else is the 4 days we were there, we had nothing whatever to eat or drink.
What did you think was going to happen to you?
We expected the to be relieved, as we'd been told we would be. But the relief never came.
And what was the feeling, what was the mood, what was the conversation amongst your friends, your comrades, your colleagues at the time?
Oh, they'll be here tomorrow. That was the conversation. They'll be here tomorrow.
When we spoke to you last time, you'll remember you talked about your crewmate Lofty Cummins, Frank, who was killed in Arnhem. And a lot of our listeners will know that this was a battle that was one of the great tragic failures for Allied forces during the war. Lofty was one of those who lost his life. You go to his grave every year, I understand.
I do indeed. I would feel there's something very sadly missing from my life if I didn't go and pay my respects.
Yeah. And that must be the feeling amongst all of those people who have travelled to Normandy as well, the great importance of needing to continue to pay your respect.
We have a great affection for the Dutch people, and they have a great affection for us. Yeah. We are treated as kings when we go there, and we treat them as if they were our kings. We love them.
What happened in the end then, Frank? How did that situation end for you?
I went down with my colleagues with our hands up. We told the Germans that we hadn't eaten for 4 days in my few words of broken German, and within 10 minutes plates of food were brought out to us. We were chatting with the Germans, most of whom spoke English, which was rather surprising. And gradually a rapport developed between us, so much so that when they took us to the transport to take us over the Rhine to the interrogation centre, we didn't even have to put our hands up.
Wow. And so how long until you were back on British soil?
I went to Stalag Luft 7 in the south of Germany, stayed there until February, and then was moved to, I stayed there until January, and was then on the long march over the Oder, where the temperature was minus 15 to minus 20, with very, very little food, but the same food as the German guards had. And we learned one thing on that march, and that was, if you can, sleep in a cowshed, because cows give off body heat and horses do not. And eventually we arrived at a camp at Luchenwald, just south of Berlin, and we stayed there for a few days, and the Red Army freed us. And the next day I was flown home.
Which must have been amazing.
It was indeed.
What do you think, Ian? What do you think when you hear these stories? It's just incredible to hear, isn't it?
Chris, it's utterly humbling when you hear stories such as Frank's, and as I say, this is really why we are so happy to be able to bring these veterans out. It's our sort of token way of saying thank you to them. We've got around about 90 taxi drivers, London taxi drivers, who give up 5 days of their time to come out here to drive the veterans, to look after them as well. Not just as drivers, they're hosting them, they're helping them, serving them food, getting them drinks, and just generally making sure everything's fine, But we're all very happy to do this. When you hear Frank's story, and others have got similar dramatic stories, I suppose I could put it that way. It's just a privilege to be part of this group and with these great people.
We say it so often, don't we, as to how much we owe these people.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
It's impossible to quantify, isn't it, really? But
it is.
Frank, just listening to your story and the way you describe it, and I'm going to try and say this as unpatronisingly as possible. I'm a man half your age, okay? More than half your age in a way. You're 92 years of age, and you're telling this story as if it was yesterday. You sound, more sprightly and alert than I do on this Thursday morning. How do you think that is, Frank? How do you think you are as you are at the age you are?
I think because of the training, the conditioning I had when I was 19 years of age. The elimination program I went through at Fargo Camp on Salisbury Plain, where we were subjected to 6 weeks of unadulterated hell in both mental and physical aspects. Whatever you did physically was not good enough, do it again. And whatever you did mentally, equally, it's not good enough, do better. And that instilled in me a discipline which is still with me.
So you think that changed your brain for good, in a way?
Oh, most certainly. And the word is for good.
Yeah. Absolutely. What do you think of what we've seen? I just want to get your thoughts, because, you know, you'll hear some people talking about the country being at war again at the moment. You hear that description from some people anyway, with the recent events that we've seen in London and we've seen in Manchester. I just want to get your thoughts, someone who has seen so much through their life. Frank, what are you making of the current situation in the country as regards the terrorist situation that we're seeing?
As far as the terrorists are concerned, one word and one word only: disgust. That anybody can be so brutal as to take the lives of not only innocent people, but innocent people against they have absolutely nothing. No grudges, they've never done them any harm, and I cannot understand the reasoning in their brains that lets them do these horrendous things.
Can you see it being defeated?
Ultimately, yes, good will survive.
And I'm sure that will be your message when you speak to school children. I don't know if you've already spoken to school children in France, but I know that's something that you're doing as part of this trip. How important is that, Frank?
Vital, absolutely vital.
Why
and that
so?
is something that is something I will try and impress on them when I speak. Do to others as you would have them do to you.
Well, look, it's been fantastic to speak to you both. And a privilege to speak to you, Frank. And thank you very, very much indeed. It's always wonderful when we hear from you.
My pleasure.
Just a final word, Ian. When's
Chris,
the next trip? Because you're coming back today. Will this happen again?
We are coming back today, and yes, certainly this is the whole point of our charity, to do trips such as this. I can't imagine we'll be able to do one quite as large as this again, with such numbers, but we've got all kinds of interesting plans for next year, because next year is the 70th anniversary of our charity, and so we want to do something a little bit special. And of course, the following year will mark the 75th anniversary of D-Day. And, again, we're looking at perhaps doing something to mark that in our own way as well. Actually, if I may, can I just give you our website? Because I'm sure a lot of people will be interested to look at what we get up to. It's very simple. It's just www.taxicharity.org. And Frank and I have got to literally rush in a moment, because talking of speaking to school children, we're off on our final day. We're going to the Caen Memorial, which is a large museum in Caen, and we've got a question and answer session arranged with some school children. And Frank is going to be one of our star speakers.
Well, look, that sounds far more important than speaking to me. So thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of the trip and the journey home. And thank you so much to both of you.
Well, thank you for letting us tell our story, and obviously especially for Frank. I'll pass you on for Frank to say goodbye.
Au revoir, mon plaisir.
Au revoir.
That's in French, not mon plaisir.
Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup, Frank.
Chris.
Au revoir.
Thank you, Chris. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Well, that was something, wasn't it? What a man, what a story, what a life Frank Ashleigh has led. A pleasure to just spend a few minutes talking to him. He's 92, he was a glider pilot in World War II, and speaking to Ian Parsons as well, one of those many cab drivers who have organised that trip, 250 World War II veterans to Normandy. I really hope they thoroughly enjoy the rest of that trip, their final day today. Thank you for your text, listening to Frank as well. Neil in Worcester says, huge respect to Frank, humbled in his radio presence. Paul from Hull, listening to Frank's story is absolutely riveting and humbling. These men fought and died so that we can exercise our right to vote, and that should never be forgotten. And Tim, who's in Lincolnshire, says similar kind of things. Listening to the World War II veterans is the reason everyone must vote today. So much sacrifice for our freedom. My father was 4 years prisoner of war and was insistent that he fought for democracy. Thank you very much.